A very good morning. I hope you're all having a great day already. A very special session. This is my first session of the year, and I'm really excited to kickstart the year on a high note and talk about password security using Manage Engine AD Self Service Plus. Hi, this is Sharda Murthy from the marketing team of Manage Engine and a product expert in AD Self Service Plus, and I will be your presenter for today. Before we jump into the session, I would like to quickly check once again if my voice is audible and the display is well and clear. Please drop in a yes message in the chat box or questions tab provided if you can hear my voice and also see my screen clearly. I am currently in the Secure Windows Logons with two-factor authentication presentation screen, and this is Sharda Murthy, your presenter for the day. All right, thank you so much. I've got a couple of yes. And if you do have any difficulty during the session with respect to seeing my screen or hearing my audio, please drop in a message so I can rectify it before I continue with this session. This is going to be a quick 30-minute informative session. We're going to start by talking about the importance of securing your Windows logon with two-factor authentication. I'm going to show you a stepwise configuration of how to set it up and get started securing your Windows or the system in your organization with the help of AD Self Service Plus. And also the last 10 minutes will be a dedicated question and answer session. But if you do have questions during the session, please keep them coming. I will try to take time and answer them in the session itself. This way we can improve the experience of this particular webinar. All right, with that said, I'm going to quickly jump into talking about how two-factor authentication works. I'm pretty sure you're aware of how it works. You would have probably experienced two-factor authentication with a lot of applications, let's say banking related applications, online applications. But today we're going to be focusing on talking about the importance of having two-factor authentication in place. We all have to come to terms with the fact that passwords are not enough. And it is very, very advisable and also extremely secure to have a secondary factor of authentication for every single Windows machine, for all the systems in your organization. If you work with a Windows-based, if you have a Windows server system in place in your organization. So how two-factor authentication for your Windows logon typically works is that every morning when a user logs into their system, they will enter their set of credentials, which is nothing but the username and password. Once this is done, what happens when you have a two-factor authenticator in place is they have to verify their identity once again. So yes, not just their password, but another mode of authentication, which verifies that a particular user who is allowed to log into that particular system is making use of that. And the advantage of this is that we are aware of who logs into the system. We also have a check on if the right person has access to the system. And at the same time, we are securing the Windows environment in our organization, which means that we are protecting our environment from attacks, our environment from insider threats, and a lot more by simply doing a couple of steps, which I'm going to walk you through right away. So with the help of a solution like AD Self Service Plus, you can make use of the basic SMS or email-based verification codes, or you can make use of Duo Security, RSA Secure ID, or Radius Server Authentication to have the secondary factor of authentication in place for users to verify their identity not once but twice before they have access to their Windows machine. So we are going to be talking about how to set this up in your organization right away. And with that said, all you see on your screen right now is the agenda that we have in place for today. We are going to be talking about improving password security with AD Self-Service Plus. Also, before I jump into the session, a quick note. The video and resource of this particular webinar will be available online. So if you would have to discontinue this session because of your busy schedule, please don't worry. All you have to do is drop in your mail ID in the questions tab or chat box provided, and I will ensure that you receive a personal copy of today's session. All right, with that said, we are going to be talking about strengthening passwords with a granular password policy. We are going to talk about enabling two-factor authentication for both local and remote desktop logons. And then finally, how we can granularly enforce two-factor authentication based on OUs and groups present in the Active Directory. So let's get started. Let's get started with the very first step, very first exercise in our agenda. I am going to quickly jump to the AD Self-Service Plus console and log in as an administrator. All right, I have a prompt that tells me that it's time to renew my license. But yes, let me get started with today's session. We were talking about enforcing a custom password policy, and the need for you to do this is to make sure that the first layer of defense, which is nothing but your passwords, is strong enough. We're aware of the fact that the password policy that Active Directory has in place has not seen any drastic change in more than 18 years. And it is very, very important to have a good password policy in place. And with a solution like AD Self-Service Plus, you can ensure that you have a granular password policy enforced specific to OUs and groups present in your Active Directory. And the advantage of this particular password policy is nothing but when a user tries to reset their password or change their password, let me enforce a custom password policy for marketing. When a user tries to enforce a custom password policy, when a user tries to reset or change their password policy, what happens is that this particular custom password policy that you have enforced as an administrator takes precedence over the native Windows password policy. And I'm going to show that to you right away. There is a standard set of default conditions that is enabled. I'm going to leave it at that. Enforce this password policy in both the ADUC and reset password pages. Click on save. Let me open a new tab. Access AD Self-Service Plus. Try and log in as a user, Adam. And you can see that Adam is required to change his password because his password is expired. But as I enter my old password and when I enter my new password, I have a set of complexity rules that I have abided to, while there are also a few that I haven't. But by default, the native Windows Active Directory would have permitted me from using this as my password. Let me try and see what happens when I try to change my password. There you go. I have a prompt that says that I have failed to meet the password policy requirements. So what we have tried to do here is that we have improved the quality of passwords. We are protecting our network, our organization by improving the first layer of defense, which is passwords, the quality of passwords, by enforcing a granular password policy specific to OUs and groups present in your Active Directory. And the major advantage is that this particular policy that you enforce from the AD Self-Service Plus console takes precedence over the native Windows password policy. This is the advantage of having a solution like AD Self-Service Plus in place. All right, so now that I've told you how we can strengthen passwords with a granular password policy, let's move on to the crux of today's session. We are going to be talking about enabling two-factor authentication for both local and remote desktop logons. Jumping back to the AD Self-Service Plus console, and logging in as an administrator. Like I said, it is extremely simple to set up Windows logon two-factor authentication in your organization. Just a couple of steps, in fact, just 3 steps to ensure that your organization is safe and secure with an additional layer of security. So under the configuration tab, under administrative tools, is where you will find Gina Mac. And when I click on Gina Mac, you can find Windows Logon two-factor authentication. But before I enable Windows Logon two-factor authentication, you can see that I have a prompt which says that I must enable login two-factor authentication to configure Windows Logon two-factor authentication. Fair enough. So let me click on login two-factor authentication, and under the advanced setting of a particular self-service policy in AD Self-Service Plus, I have two-factor authentication listed right there. I am going to enable this, and since I would like to show you how this works, I am going to set this up with the verification code and the email verification code. I'm clicking on OK, and this is applied. That is, two-factor authentication is applied for the policy admin. All right, going back to administrative tools, clicking on Gina Mac CP, going to Windows Logon two-factor authentication, I am going to enable Windows Logon two-factor authentication, click on Save, and my settings have been successfully updated. Believe me when I say this right now, this is all I need to do to get started setting up my Windows Logon two-factor authentication for users in a particular organizational unit. All right, so now let me test by taking a remote desktop logon connection for the user Sharada, logging in as Sharada, which is myself. I have a message right here on my Gina CP screen, which asks me to choose a mail ID. And once I do that and click on continue, I am asked for an email-based verification code. Please note that this is after giving in my first set of credentials, which is my username and password. So now I've moved on to the second set of credentials, wherein I've configured email-based verification code as an administrator. So when the user logs in, that is the user Sharda logs in, right in the Gina CP's console is where she has a prompt to give in the email verification code. So what I'm going to do now is minimize this screen, access my email address. I've logged in right here, and make note of this code, which is 87994091. I hope my memory serves me right. I'm going to click on continue. Yes, that's about it. A successful login into Sharada's account by not just ensuring that the user has the first set of credentials, but by also verifying the user's identity by having a secondary factor of authentication, which is nothing but an email-based verification code in our case. And this could be anything more than an email-based verification code. It could be your Duo security, your RSA secure ID, your Radius server authentication, and you as an administrator have control of choosing that. And that is the third session for today. So under the login two-factor authentication, when you enable two-factor authentication for a particular self-service policy, you can choose which mode of authentication you would like the user to verify their identity with. If I choose Radius authentication, I have to give in the configuration details right here for my Radius server. In that case, the user in your organization will have to go through the Radius server authentication as a secondary factor of authentication before proceeding or before being able to log into their system. All right. So once this is done, we have we know how simple it is to enable two-factor authentication for both local and remote desktop logons. But two important factors that you need to note right here is when you enable Gina Mac Windows Logon two-factor authentication, there are three things that you need to keep in mind. I said it's a three-step configuration. Let me walk you through what I had previously done before getting started with today's session. The first and the very important step would be to go to the admin tab, to go to product settings, and under connection, you will have to enable the SSL port because Windows Logon two-factor authentication works with the HTTPS setting only. And you also have to ensure that your configuration access URL matches with the right protocol, server name, and port number. So you can see that I'm running in the right protocol and port number right here. So this will be step one when you get started configuring two-factor authentication. Your very next step, which is step two, would be to enable login two-factor authentication for the self-service policy. If you're wondering what self-service policy is, you can get the answer right here on your screen. When you get started working with AD Self-Service Plus, you can create policies specific to OUs or groups present in your Active Directory, and that is what we call self-service policy. And as you see on your screen, I have created two already, admin and marketing, and I will have to enable login two-factor authentication right here to be able to successfully proceed to my third step. So these two steps are mandatory. And if you fail to do either, don't worry, you will have a prompt right there on your screen when you try to configure Windows two-factor authentication. All right. So when I jump to the administrative tab, when I go to Gina Mac installation, and when I click on login two-factor authentication, I will have a prompt right here telling me that I will have to enable Windows two-factor authentication in the policy configuration and also have my application running in the HTTPS protocol. All right, after which I will be able to successfully enable Windows Logon two-factor authentication. But a very important factor that you as an administrator need to keep a check on is that you will have to ensure that your Gina Mac installation is up and running. The safe bet would be to try and reinstall for all the computers right here. That way, you can ensure that users will be able to successfully go through the secondary factor of authentication. So let me show you another case. So what happens when you have failed to install the Gina Mac installation? What if this is not up and running? In spite of having two-factor authentication configured, users will still be able to go through a successful login without having to go through the secondary factor of authentication. And we as administrators definitely don't want that. So keep a quick check on this, a double check by reinstalling for all the applications just for the very first time, just for the very first attempt. Otherwise, you're good to go. All right, so if you had noticed, you would have seen that there is an option to bypass two-factor authentication if the if the AD Self-Service Plus server is down. So I'm going to walk you through what will happen if you have not checked this box. If you choose for users to go through a secondary factor of authentication, no matter what, I'm going to walk you through what's going to happen right now. So I've just enabled two-factor authentication. I am going to close AD Self-Service Plus. I am also going to shut down the server. Yes, I have shut it down. Now when I take a remote logon, try and log in to Sharada's account. I have a prompt on my screen a restriction alert which says I need to contact the administrator because I could not connect to the AD Service Plus server. So this way, when the server is down, when your password management application's server is down, you can ensure that users have restricted access. Once again, when I said this, you can also make sure that this happens for a specific OU. Let's say for privileged user accounts or administrative groups. So you can ensure that this restriction is levied specific to OUs or groups present in your Active Directory. So let me try and quickly get back on board with AD Self-Service Plus, a couple of seconds there. All right, I'm going to log in. And under the configuration tab, you can see that this can be restricted, like I said, specific to OUs and groups. So let's talk about groups. Let's talk about, let's say, administrator groups. So you can ensure that administrators do not log in when the product is down. That way, they're aware of when AD Self-Service Plus server is down. All right, that is one. Another thing that I wanted to talk about today is single sign-on. So I'm sure you're aware that AD Self-Service Plus, the password management, and an integrated single sign-on solution supports one-click access to multiple applications. So what happens is that if you configure an access to a particular application, in this case, I've pre-configured Google Apps, I'm going to try and log in as a user right now from the AD Self-Service Plus console and show you that when a user accesses their AD Self-Service Plus account, logging in, when a user logs into their AD Self-Service Plus account, they will have to go through the secondary factor of authentication right there in the web console as well, which means that after I enter my password, let me quickly log in. And copy the code and paste this. Paste the email-based verification code, trust the browser, continue. And in this way, I, as an administrator, am ensuring that when users log in and access their single sign-on enabled application from this one-click access portal, they are doing it in a secure way. So with Windows Logon two-factor authentication enabled for users in your organization, you are also ensuring that you can enforce this granularly and at the same time for both your local and remote desktop machines, as well as securing access to all your cloud applications that users can log in through single sign-on by enabling two-factor authentication for the AD Self-Service Plus console as well. So yes, with that said, I have come to the end of today's session. I'm going to give you a quick recap of what we saw before I sign off for today. If you do have any questions, please keep them coming in the chat box or the questions tab. All right, so we started the session by talking about why we need to have a good password security in place and how you can achieve that with AD Self-Service Plus. So the first layer of defense is nothing but our native Windows Active Directory passwords. And we saw how we can enforce a granular password policy specific to OUs and groups with the help of AD Self-Service Plus. For example, avoid dictionary words, restrict patterns, use passphrases, include special characters, Unicode characters, and a lot more. I will let you work around with the permutation and combinations. You can enforce a custom granular password policy, which will take precedence over the native Windows Active Directory password policy, ensuring that the first layer of defense is strong and your organization is already secure enough. But we also have to come to terms with the fact that passwords are not enough. And to cope up with that fact, we have another factor of authentication, two-factor authentication in place for not only your local desktops, but your remote desktop logons for your single sign-on enabled applications as well. And we are achieving this with Windows Logon two-factor authentication from AD Self-Service Plus. Like I said, just a three-step process. Ensure that AD Self-Service Plus is running in the HTTPS protocol. Ensure that you have enabled two-factor authentication for a particular password policy. Like I said, the password policy is specific to OUs and groups present in your Active Directory, which gives you the advantage of granularly enabling two-factor authentication based on OUs and groups, which means that you can keep verification code for, let's say, the marketing team and let's say the Radius server authentication for administrative groups. And once you have done that, you have to go through the Gina CP configuration or installation part in the administrative section, where you can manually check to enable Windows two-factor authentication. You can also override this particular process when the AD Self-Service Plus server is down. But a very quick check before you get started, you need to ensure that the Gina Mac installation is up and running in all the computers. And the safe bet would be to reinstall it once again before you get going. Just a simple three-step process to take the security of your organization from a very basic native Windows password policy all the way up to improved password security with AD Self-Service Plus. And yes, with that said, I am ending today's session. If you get started working with AD Self-Service Plus and have trouble with configuring any of the above said configuration, please reach out to my support team. They will be there to guide you, to help you set it up and get started. You can reach them at support@adselfserviceplus.com. Also, this is Sharda Murthy, your presenter for the day. I am from the marketing team of Manage Engine and also a product expert in AD Self-Service Plus. Let me guarantee this. I have days when I forget my passwords. I have days when I have been, my password is expired or I've been logged out of my account. There have been days when I do not want to have a good enough password because it's difficult for me to remember. And I'm sitting right here talking to you about the importance of password security. So yes, we all go through that, but like I said, with the right solution in place, you can ensure that the trouble associated with passwords can be eliminated. And note when I say this, I'm not saying reduced, I'm talking about eliminating password related troubles. And that's exactly why I'm here. With that said, you can also access the AD Self-Service Plus resource base. We have a wide range of tips and tricks, knowledge-based articles, a dedicated blog, a fun blog, I would say, and also a forum for discussions, community building. So yes, you can get in touch with us. You can get in touch with me for any questions that you have. Right now, I'm going to take a little time from today's session to answer the questions popping up on my screen. And once again, if you require the copy of this particular seminar this particular webinar, please drop in a mail to me at sharda@manageengine.com. With that said, I'm wishing you a great day and a great week ahead. Thank you so much. And this is Sharda Murthy signing off for the day.